Good evening, good night, and good morning to all our participants and friends and colleagues who are listening to this wonderful fireside chat with a very, very distinguished guest. This event is part of WISE, which is Women Initiative for Social Entrepreneurship, a global movement that stemmed from the South and is an Ashoka initiative, where we are trying with all our fellows and social entrepreneurs and enablers to redefine success from a gender and a social entrepreneurship point of view, and where we also want to share with you stories of icons and role models, women who really were able to overcome challenges, because WISE gives voice to women, and we want to show the world, the ecosystem, that we do have an impact in any field we work in. Before we start, I would like to present our esteemed guest. Believe me, I tried to summarize it as much as possible. This is not very little of what she has done. Pat Michell is an Emmy Award-winning and Oscar-nominated producer committed to leveraging the power of media to tell women's stories. How very appropriate and aligned with what we want to do. She's the first woman to own and host a nationally syndicated daily talk show, and the first woman President and CEO of PBS and the Paley Center for Media. In partnership with TED, Michell launched TED Women in 2010 and is editorial director, curator, and host. Among many other achievements, she has worked as the president of CNN Productions and has been honored by the Women's Media Center's first annual Lifetime Achievement Award, now named in her honor to commend other women whose media career advanced the representation of women. Still, recognized by Hollywood Reporter as one of the most powerful women in the media, Fast Company's League of Extraordinary Women and Huffington Post list of powerful women, over 50. Michell also received the Sandra Day O'Connor Award for Leadership, and in 2016, she received the congressional appointment to the American Museum of Women's History Advisory Council. In 2019, she was named to the Gender Equality among the Gender Equality Top 100 list of women leaders by Apolitical. Say hello and say thank you for joining us today. This is only a little of what you have done, but we are honored to have you with us, Pat.
Thank you, Iman. It's a great privilege to be with you and to know that we are talking as we can now with you in Cairo and me in Atlanta, Georgia. I look forward to visiting you in person one day, though.
Please come. I have an extra room in an interesting, nice flat. You're always welcome. I would like also, thank you, to really frame this and say that, this fire chat, we want to delve into the guest of honor's unique insights into making impact. We also want to, share, we want you to share with us the challenges that you had overcome, because successful women do face challenges, but they do overcome these challenges. And also how 2020 can be a portal for progress. We want to always see the silver lining. And actually one of the silver linings is to have this chat in spite of COVID-19. We want also to see your vision for an ecosystem that's impact and women social entrepreneurs, but also women leaders everywhere. So again, thank you so much for being here. I have many questions for you. I will start. I hope the time allows us, but you are both an icon and a force to be reckoned with in media. With 35 Emmys and 5 Peabody Awards and a prolific career in media journalism, how have you found the media to be a powerful medium for social change, and more specifically, in changing mindsets and patterns of behavior? What is the role of media, in your opinion, in changing mindsets, which we call scaling deep?
Well, the role of media cannot be overestimated, because the media, excuse me, the media is both the message as well as the messenger. It's the way we get the stories of our lives, and it also frames the stories of our lives by the way in which we as media consumers take it all in. And even though the media landscape has changed so tremendously, Iman, since I started to work in it so many years ago when there were so few women and almost no communities of color represented. And the programming was, it was an absence of any programming of relevance to women and the way they live their lives. So when I got my job inside media, and that's a long story in itself of overcoming challenges, I looked around and I thought, first of all, this doesn't look like where we live. This doesn't look like our communities. This doesn't look like those stories of women I know and the amazing accomplishments as well as challenges of women. And I began to advocate inside the media companies where I worked for two things: get more people on the screen, in reporting, producing, leading, who look like our communities. We're supposed to be serving the communities after all. And then secondly, since media has such impact, as you say, on the way people think, it shapes our opinions, it even forms our beliefs or certainly strengthens them. And it has, over the years, created some very unfortunate stereotypes. The misrepresentation of women in particular is as harmful as the underrepresentation of women. So I set about thinking, well, I have a little bit of influence in that I have a job inside this media company or the various companies I worked for. How can I use that influence, use that power to further leverage the power of media to tell the full stories, to bring women's full lives and experiences onto the screen, into films, in every way in which we are consuming media. There needs to be not only truth and facts, but there needs to be a much more accurate and full representation of the complexity and the beauty and the experiences that make up the stories of women's lives. So that's been a life's work for me.
That is what we call scale deep, you know, because you are changing mindsets by providing more representation of your community, whether women or people from different, different ethnicity. That's what you did. You made, us or the people see different types of women and accept them, different type of community members and accept them.
Which brings when I launched my first national series that was hosted by a woman and produced by an all-women's production company, because I felt like I needed to have women's voices making the decision about what stories were told. And so why not have a group of women representative of all communities we wanted to reach in the room, at the table, making the decisions. But when we decided to call the show Woman to Woman, every male that we talked to, every executive that we talked to would say, women aren't going to watch a program called Woman to Woman. Why would you have to name it something else. And I would always ask them, have you talked to your wife or your daughter or your neighbor about that? Just ask them how they feel about a show called Woman to Woman. And of course, every one of them would come back and go, well, my wife says she wants to watch that. And so does my daughter. So we realized that women are interested in one another. We want to know each other's stories. We learn from each other's stories. So that was the first experience I had in pushing forward a program that did that, that did share women's stories. And I still don't think there are enough of them on television. There certainly aren't enough of them on the big movie screens, although that number has gotten better. And as you and I know, the most important thing about mindset is who's telling the stories,
Exactly.
The stories have got to come from the communities who are living them.
Totally. And so you are a dangerous woman. This brings me to your book. Good. Becoming a Dangerous Woman, a book that you have written and that is not everywhere, but I'd like to tell everyone who's listening to us that it is on Amazon and you can buy it now because it is a strong book. You talk about your path to power and how you overcome challenges, which I always believe is important. One piece of advice you would give aspiring young girls and women who aim to be a force for good also within the media sector in particular, but in general?
Well, the first piece of advice that I wish someone had given me earlier on, even though I felt that intrinsic, that it was the right way to go, but I didn't always have the courage to do it. My biggest single piece of advice is never take no for an answer. It's simple. And people used to say that to me when I would get no's, and I'd always think, well, easy for you to say that, but how do you do that? And how I did it and how others do it every day is we just go about proving that we can do the job, even though a woman never did it before, or we can aspire to be a leader in our community or in our government. And proving over and over again, every time there is a no, as Martin Luther King Jr. said, eventually, we get to the yes. And so that's my advice. You have to be willing to fail, though. You have to be willing to make mistakes because you have to take risk. When someone says no and you say, but I can, and then you go about proving that you can, we're all taking risk when we do that. But you have to take the risk or you'll never be able, to get to that full potential of what we all envision as possible.
Can you give us an example? I mean, like an example where you didn't, I don't call it failure, but a challenge, and another example where you managed in spite of all challenges, because also we want people to know that you're an icon, but also you're human, and that's okay,
By the way, I don't know what icon means, but it sounds old.
Okay. You're a young icon.
No, Iman, it's a very good question. And I actually could point to many, many times, but I'll try and think of 3 different times on my journey where it was significant. The first time was as a child. I grew up in a rural environment with no money and no connections or resources. So when I determined early, really because my grandmother, who was an illiterate, uneducated farm worker, said to me, you have potential and you have to dream big. And she influenced me. So when I got old enough to see what I wanted outside of that little world, to know that I wanted to go beyond that to fulfill my potential, education was the only way out. So I said to my family, I'm going to college. And they said, no, we can't afford it. There's no college anywhere close. So no, you can't. And so that set me on a path to prove that I could. And I worked until I got myself a scholarship and I got myself a job. And I did those things that women do when the door closes, I just looked for another one to open. So that was significant because education was my ticket out of poverty and my ticket out of that situation. It opened doors. The second time was probably when I applied for my first job in television. And I was told, you're too old. I was all of 26 years old, by the way. You're too old and you have a child, and we don't hire women with children. So that was a big no. And I spent the next almost year trying to find a television company that would hire me with a young child and already 26, which they said was old. And eventually, because I just kept knocking on doors and I just kept not taking no for an answer, I didn't give up. I supported myself in other ways until then. And finally, one person said, yes, we'll give it a try. And so we did. And the third time, which was a career-changing moment, as well as a personal transformation, was when I had a very big job at a very big network and was doing very well, by all standards successful. And I wanted to tell the story of women in the Middle East who were advocating for peace quietly and out of the spotlight and dangerously, taking risk to meet each other. Palestinian women and Israeli women working for peace during the first Intifada and the second Intifada too, in the case of these women. But I wanted to bring their stories to America, to an American network, and share them. And my boss said no. He said, no, nobody cares. They're not famous. They're not in political office. The US, they won't care. That's way over there. So I quit my job. And I booked myself a flight to Tel Aviv, where I, of course, had never been before. And I stayed in Israel until I lived in Jerusalem and worked to find those women and build their trust, and spent time on each side of that conflict, trying to tell a full story of what was happening to the women, wives, children, communities, from both perspectives. So that not only brought me into my global work then, and it's been the center of my work ever since, but it also introduced me to a very important, it didn't introduce me, it showed me that women at every table bring a different set of perspectives and experiences. And women are absolutely essential at a peace table. Because if you don't take into account education and all the other things that matter deeply to everyone, but especially to mothers and families, then the peace isn't sustainable, as we know. So that began my journey around the world, documenting the differences that women make everywhere, but certainly that women make in terms of war and peace.
Cause-driven, and value-driven is really one of the things we found. Ashoka conducted a survey in 2018 among more than 800 fellows. 40% of were women. And what was interesting is that most of the women working on issues are cause-driven. And, to leave a very prominent job because of what you believe reminds me a little bit of myself too, and a lot of women I know. But it's also brings me to a question about two people that are friends, our friends, Eve Ensler and Hibak Osman, and the V movement, and how you worked in different ways. And I really like you to explain it also, to really advance women and to really fight violence against women everywhere. I really think the story is so important. So take your time, explain it to people. This is very essential.
Thank you, Iman. The story of Eve Ensler, VDay, and all of the anti-violence activists all over the world is a critical one to tell. And I believe that the full story of how you create a global movement is the story that it could be the biggest game changer for all of us. If we, collectively put all our stories together about what has been accomplished by women like yourself and your community and the women and men listening to us, because we have to have those male allies too. But VDay, the VDay movement, which is end violence against women and girls everywhere, that was the goal. And for Eve, who now calls herself V, so I'll try and now say V, when V wrote a very best-selling book called The Vagina Monologues. She knew that this was a way to use media, in this case, theater, to open up people's minds, to listen to the stories of survivors of sexual assault and violence. And that really, these were monologues or stories that V had collected all over the world, from the Bosnian rape camps to Kenya, where FGM was being experienced by so many women all over the world. She found these women who were already finding solutions to the problems, but the violence was continuing. So what Eve set up, what V set up, was a organization that would support these people already on the ground doing the work in their communities. And that's the model of VDay. When we went to work in Kenya to end FGM, we went with a Maasai woman who had been doing that work for 20 years before we showed up to help. And when we went to Egypt and to Somalia and to other countries, it was people like you who brought V into your home and showed the play and had the conversations. And that's the way the work started and the way it has continued now for, well, we're almost at 30 years, believe it or not. And when we talk about impact, Iman, we know the impact, because each of these organizations, like your House of Ruth in Cairo, each of these organizations that has offered support services to survivors of sexual violence, as well as training and skills. I mean, we see the difference that having a place to go, having a support system, having a community can make all the difference in the world. And your shelter is a really good example, as are the shelters that VDay has helped support to build in Afghanistan, in India, in Kenya, South Africa, and in particular the Congo, where there was the worst number of sexual violent cases happening almost daily. And now City of Joy there, which VDay established, has become a model for how you offer solace, healing, and training to create not just survivors, and you know this because you also see these stories every day. The idea behind VDay is not just to end the violence, although that is step number one, but then to give the survivors of the violence what they need to become leaders in their communities. And that's what is starting to be transformative all over the world.
Well, we on behalf of all women everywhere, we really are very thankful to you and V and everyone who works to end violence against women, which is in every country in the world in different ways. But you also talked about we don't want to only end the violence, but also to do more. And this brings me to, in Ashoka, we believe in everyone is a change maker, but also we believe that the younger generation are the future. And we want to create a generation of what we call young change makers. And we, in WISE, want to focus on girls. And young change makers for us are those who think out of the box, who have space to be change makers, to be innovative, to have confidence. I would like, I mean, did you have a similar experience? Did you work with young people and really young, like I'm talking about 15 to 20? What would you advise us to do? What do you think you want to do about it?
Actually, Iman, I think the learning works the other way. I don't think I'm teaching them anything. I think they're teaching me so much. I have grandchildren in that age group, by the way, and my granddaughters are fierce. I mean, they know what they believe in and they stand up for their convictions, and they're out marching in the streets for racial justice and the environmental justice, and they have been. So I feel like this next generation of leaders are the ones that give me the greatest hope. They are mobilized. They are, they recognize the urgency of so many of the challenges that our generation is still left on the table. Creating a sustainable planet to begin with, and then finally getting real social justice and real gender and racial equality. We're a long way from those goals, as we know. And every entrepreneur that Ashoka funds and supports, every community group that is identified who's doing something towards those goals, yes, they are making progress, and we should celebrate it, and we need to keep supporting it. Coming behind, I think, is a whole generation of young people. I haven't experienced it as much as you have in Egypt or other places in the Middle East where I haven't been, although I was in Jordan many times over the last 4 or 5 years and worked with some of the young people, particularly the ones in the refugee camps. And boy, the resilience, the entrepreneurship to see what they're creating in the worst of circumstances to solve problems, really inspiring. So I'm very hopeful about the next generation of leadership because they see the urgency and they're stepping up earlier than many of us did. They're getting activated earlier.
I have 3 questions. The first one is, when we were talking before the event, you talked about, I worked a lot with combating violence against women, but I'm also interested in women leadership. And many people say this, but I am sure with your experience in media, in caring about representation and going all over the world, what are you doing about it? And what should we be doing about it? I mean, I want to learn from you now.
The first definition I have for a woman leader is that women have the capacity, I believe, and the value system in most cases to be a transformative leader, not just a leader or a change maker, but a really transformative change leader. And so I began to bring together women leaders from business, from society, social enterprises, from nonprofits, from government, and gathering them together, women from different geographies, different backgrounds, different work, and saying, let's get together and share what we know, what our experiences have been, and use it to collectively problem solve. Let's take the problems of climate, food security, global health, economic inclusiveness. Let's take those challenges and let's problem solve together. So I began that work in 2017 in partnership with the Rockefeller Foundation, and we called it Transformative Women Leaders. And after that first meeting, everybody said, let's just call it Connected Women Leaders, because that's what we are. We are connected to each other, and we are connected to the commitment to solve the challenges as best we can as a collective as well as individually. So that's been the work. We've been convening forums like this one since the pandemic. And before that, we actually met in person at various times, and taking the experience and expertise of the group, diving deep, as you said, diving beneath the skin, going where the problems are, and then coming up with new solutions. And, we haven't solved any of those problems completely, obviously, but in some cases, I can point to leadership that was strengthened by the group that was able to go back and do even more than they were doing before. So there is strength that comes from connecting women leaders together. And that's been the nature of my work most recently.
It's very, very, I can't believe how aligned, because you mentioned 2 things, global health problems and climate. And from our research with Ashoka Fellows and, social entrepreneurs, with people who are trying to solve social problems, the majority of those working in these fields as leaders are women. Yeah. And this is something where we need your help and the help of all the role models in the world. Yet, when investors come to invest in women, because these are long-term, as you said, because these are changes of mindset and behavior, because we delve deep, we are not, or these women are not recognized as an example of success because we're not counting heads. How can we convince the ecosystem, the investors, the world, that social impact, scaling deep, scaling up, changing mindsets is the only way to save the planet? What do you think,
A friend of mine puts it this way, Iman. She says, the final frontier for feminism is finance. And think about it. It's really true. There's so much we can do, but then there's a lot more we could do if we had the investment and capital to the enterprises that are led by women, to the nonprofits being led by women, to the businesses being led by women. Because here's the deal. We know each of those areas in which women are primarily leaders of new businesses, nonprofits, social enterprises, more women are running those, as you suggest, as well as caregiving and everything else. But we know that if that sector had more capital available to it, had more investment, we would be able to measure the impact a lot more, and the impact would be significant. When I went on the board of Acumen, which is like Ashoka, an organization devoted to social entrepreneurs, people who are finding solutions to problems and scaling them to have impact, we weren't investing in a lot of women entrepreneurs. And I remember bringing that up at a board meeting and saying, why? And I would hear back from some of the people working in the fields in different countries. I'd hear back, well, we can't find them. Or they haven't surfaced, they haven't scaled their work to an area where we can believe that it can really have impact. Well, the answer to both those questions is you just have to look a little harder. The women are there. Women are in every country the largest number of entrepreneurs, as you know better than I do, who are coming up with the innovations, the social innovations in particular, that really are desperately needed to change mindset and change culture. But they are getting less than 12% of the worldwide investment in capital. And in this country, the United States, less than 2% of venture capital dollars are going to support women's new ventures. Well, that's outrageous. And how how can we expect women to have the impact we want to measure and know we can measure if we're not also investing upfront in their ideas and in their enterprises?
One of my colleagues who became a very, very rich businessman, I used to get an A. He used to get a C in the school, but anyway, he's now much richer. When he told me something like this, I said, okay, but if we don't protect, a lot of these women are protecting the climate. It was about the Nile and cleaning the Nile. If there is no Nile, there is no water. If there is no water, nobody will buy your products. I want the business people and the ecosystem to understand that protecting people from violence and improving health and climate change actually is creating stable markets. So it is to their benefit, But
no question. I actually think we have an opportunity because of this pandemic, which has brought so much grief and loss, and I don't want to underestimate that. But this pandemic has also showed us new opportunities for investing differently and on a different value system. And I really do believe that women do bring a different set of values if we are truly connected to our authentic selves. So there are certainly women who are leaders I don't admire, and there are women who do not lead from a feminist point of view. That's Eve calling me. That is so funny. I'll tell her we just talked about her. Amen. But back to the subject of investments and why it's so important, is that the ecosystem that you suggest rightly does not see the same value in a woman's enterprise as they do in a man's, because fundamentally they believe the woman won't be as successful, won't have as much impact. And we know that all comes from the way media and everything else, cultural, social, and political oppressions have built those stereotypes. But we do know from data that when women have the investment they need, when they have the support they need, they not only succeed, they exceed people who have been before them. And I believe that's because we operate from a different value system.
So we count you now one of the members of the movement for WISE. Hello? Hello? I am here. Can you hear me now?
Man, are you talking to me? Or are you talking to WISE, right?
No, I was talking to you. I was saying then we would consider you a new member in the global movement for WISE.
Oh, let's do that part again. Can you? Because I thought I thought you said, and now we will hear from a member of the WISE community. So I was waiting to meet one of your colleagues.
Well, we share the same values, the same connection, the same beliefs, and we are trying. WISE is a global movement, belongs to everyone. And so I was just saying that now we have a new, ambassador, a new believer in WISE. So
I definitely am a believer in it. And I know from researching that your projects have had the kind of impact we're just talking about, that when you launched an initiative, you got a law changed. Not many people have that kind of impact, and yet we know it's essential to have. So every time I hear of the kind of success and the value-driven way in which you are approaching your work, these are the stories we need to share with one another widely so that we inspire one another and we show up for one another to do the same. So thank you for the invitation to be a part of WISE. I'm deeply honored to accept.
It's our honor. So my last question is, what is your dream? Like, I love people to dream. I think dreaming is wonderful. So what is your dream now? Like, I want X, and again, because you are a doer, you will do it.
Well, I want to see a president of my country in my lifetime. So let's start there. That's one. I would like to see women equally and fairly represented. And by that, I mean all women from all communities of color, equally, fairly represented at every table, in every room, and in every organization or body where decisions are made about our bodies, our lives, and our world. Because I believe, and I envision this clearly, that women will have a critical role to play and will take it up to create a more just and sustainable and equitable world. That's my dream.
Thank you so much. I mean, I just want to tell you that this is a very interesting, inspiring conversation, and I always liked you. I like you even more now. And welcome to being part of the WISE Fireside Chat and being part of the WISE movement. Any final words you would like to say and share with all the audience? We have so many people that are all saying wonderful things about you. So would you like to share things, an experience, a story, somebody to know you a little bit even more as a person?
Well, there's so many stories when you finally get to be 78 years old. And man, you have a lot of stories to share, which I do share in the book. But for me, the best part of my life always has been when women show up for each other. And there is where I feel my life has been changed, when women have shown up for me, or I've been able to show up for them. And that's not to say that we want this to be without men. Of course, we want men on our side, by our side, supporting us, as we need allies from every community. So I don't know that I would have a story, except maybe this one, given the direction of our conversation. When I said to my last job, my last full-time CEO position at the Paley Center for Media, when I told him at 70 that I wanted to leave and he said to me, retire? You can't retire. You're pathologically unable to retire. Unknown caller. And I said, yes, I know that. I am not going to retire. I'm going to rewire. And that is what I think about every day, is what can I rewire today that it might improve the lives of someone else, might make this world a little bit better, and try and carry that light, because it's a long journey that we're all on, and we're on an unexpected part of it right now, one that has upended everything except the one thing that we have to have, and that is believing in our own dreams and in our own capacity and ability to make a difference in the world.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to Amazon immediately after this call. Becoming a Dangerous Woman is a book on Amazon that I will read, and maybe I will write Becoming the Second Dangerous Woman.
I would love to read that book.
Thank you so much for being here. We loved you. Everybody who's listened loved you. It's been an honor. And thank you for being part of this. Really, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Look forward to seeing you in Cairo.
Yes, you have to come.
Right.
Thank you, everyone who's listening. Thank you, Ashoka team, Wise team, my dearest Claire, and everybody who's been involved in making this happen. Thank you again. And thank you, Pat Michell, my role model.
Bye, man. You are my role model.
Bye-bye.